All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Erin Redding. The title of my project is Taking the Pulse of the Great Lakes using Gaussian neural processes to identify optimal observing sites. And don't worry, I'll explain what a Gaussian neural process is. I want to thank my mentors, Dani Jones and Russ Miller from CIGLR and Shelby Brenner from the Great Lakes Observing System. Funding for this project comes from the NOAA GLOS SOAR project, and I want to thank everybody at CIGLR, GLOS, and the Great Lakes Observing System who has helped me along this project. So I'm entering my last year of undergrad at UC Berkeley, graduating in the spring. I'm majoring in data science and have a minor in conservation and resource studies. So our research question was, where should the next generation of temperature measurement sensors be placed in order to most effectively improve our quantitative understanding of Great Lakes surface temperature variability? So why surface temperature? We chose that because there's so much data. Remotely sensed products have given us a uniquely ubiquitous data set. So why do we need sensors? I want to talk about the Great Lakes Observing System, or GLOS. It's a nonprofit. It's a recognized data aggregator that is able to submit information to a federal data archive and receives funding from NOAA. It's a centralizing point across Great Lakes information. And so that information informs research directions, informs ship captains, models and forecasts, helps with water treatment, and helps make real-time management and safety decisions. And there are over 1 million visits to CIGLR, which is a website hosted by GLOS where people can check information of buoys. So there are over 1 million visits each summer. And so that's anglers and beachgoers, and so many people depend on this data. If a buoy is down for hours, they will let GLOS know. So what is a Gaussian neural process? So starting small, a Gaussian process is a very common way to generalize data. The key assumption is that a distribution is normal with mean and covariance. That's that sigma. And covariance is how every point or data structure is related to one another. And so this is a probabilistic model. So when you make predictions, rather than having a single value, you have a distribution with mean and covariance. And so we can say that that captures uncertainty in the prediction. So we can see with this figure, we have observed points and uncertainty in the predictions between them. So if you could think, if we had the power to place one more point, where would we place it to reduce uncertainty? And you would think between the first 2 points or after the last. And so a Gaussian neural process uses a neural network to parameterize this distribution. And a neural network is a type of machine learning that has encoding and decoding layers. So some previous research done is environmental sensor placement with convolution Gaussian neural processes. That is a paper done by individuals at British Antarctic Survey, including Tom Anderson and Dani Jones. And so in this paper, they fused data sets. They looked at ERA 5 reanalysis data, elevation, day of year cycle. So that is including gridded and non-gridded data, which is pretty novel. It also uses a convolution Gaussian neural process model. And how that differs is that it uses a convolution neural network to parameterize, which is a special type that is used in image processing and spatial data. So in this paper, they artificially constructed a data limited scenario to reflect an actual observing system. And so they did that to capture the underlying covariance structure, how every point is related to one another across space and time. And so it uses that to locate uncertainty and uses that to inform sensor placement. So they're not trying to predict the future, but rather, again, understand that underlying structure. And so we can call this paper the Deep Sensor paper because it was the motivation to create Deep Sensor, which is an open source Python package that does a lot of the work, that helps people do a lot of the work that was done in that paper. So we utilize this package to train models and make predictions. So in our Great Lakes Deep Sensor use case, we looked at GLC data, which is a remotely sensed product. We looked at temperature anomalies. So we looked at the day of year spatial mean for each day of the year and saw how each day differed from that. So we can see on this July 4th, 2016 date, Lake Michigan was 4 degrees Celsius warmer than average. And that average is is calculated using 2007 to 2021. And we also have a lake mask and bathymetry. And I want to thank David Cannon for making sure that we have this data and providing it to us. So onto training the model, we used 2007, or we reserved 2007 to 2014 for training, used 2015 and 16 during the training process to validate that the model is becoming more accurate. And then 2017 to 2021 was used to make predictions. So this train, validation, and test is a very common way to split up data in machine learning. So we explored 3 different training regimes. First, we used all grid points across many training days. So this is a visualization of the training process. So on the x-axis, we have the number of epochs or training iterations. And so we want to see training cost decrease as epochs increase. And so that's saying that the model is fitting the training data better. And we also want to see the validation, root mean squared error, decrease as epochs increase. And so what we want to see is a convergence. So we kind of see that the error does not get extremely lower. So this is as good as the model can fit this data, essentially. So we saw a complete characterization. So in black, we have the ground truth, the actual numbers of the GLC anomalies across a time series of Southern Lake Michigan through a test year of 2021. And we have the mean prediction in blue with a prediction envelope of 1 standard deviation. And we could see these lines are exactly on top of each other. If I told you there were 2 lines, you wouldn't know. So this is a complete characterization of the data because we provided so much. But very few variables in the Great Lakes can be constrained this well. It's not the reality of most observing systems. So we moved on to using random sampling across the grid space across many training days. And this is the training regime that the Deep Sensor paper uses. And so we don't see a very clear downward trend in root mean squared error, and that's telling us the model is not fitting the data very well. And so it does not converge. We're not seeing that drop and then staying relatively the same. And as a caveat, I want to note the model would do better if we trained on more epochs, but that was not explored due to computing time. So using this regime, we saw that it was generally not enough information. So again, we have the ground truth GLC data in black and the mean prediction and envelope in blue. So this was generally, we saw that with insufficient data, the model does not converge. It's not capturing the actual reality in its envelope. So lastly, we looked at using all grid points, but using 1 single training day. And this is a bit of an arbitrary training approach, I will say. But we saw that training across all the Great Lakes with this training regime did in fact converge. We see a nice downward trend in training cost, and the validation error goes down and converges. And so again, looking at a time series of Southern Lake Michigan, we see that the ground truth is captured in this prediction envelope, but not so much as to have 0 uncertainty everywhere. We can see that there's an envelope, but the lines are not on top of each other. So when this model predicts, it gives a mean prediction and standard deviation plot for every coordinate, for every day that it predicts on. So on the top, the figure is the average across the test years of 2017 to 2021. And again, this is the prediction, the average of prediction mean. So we can see that across these test years, we saw Lake Superior being cooler than average, with the westernmost tip being hotter than average. But I want to look at the bottom plot, which is the average of prediction standard deviations. So we're kind of using standard deviation as a proxy for uncertainty. So we can see that in Southern Lake Superior, there's higher levels, and as well as Western and Southern Lake Michigan, Coastal Lake Huron, and all of Lake Erie. So these are known highly variable sites. These are shallower, rapidly changing areas that this prediction uncertainty is highlighting. And so if we look at where there are actually deployed sensors, we see that these are recognized highly variable areas, especially if we look at Western Lake Michigan, and Lake Erie. So this satellite-derived prediction uncertainties are illustrating that the existing temperature network is capturing some of this uncertainty. So next we looked at using this regime, the one single training day, all grid cells, on Lake Superior alone. And we did see that it did in fact converge. And we did see an odd spike around 20 epochs, so we likely could have stopped training earlier than that. And to look at the spatial plots, if I will point you to the standard deviation, we see a higher minimum standard deviation across Lake Superior. So it's saying it's less confident in its predictions. And again, if you look at a time series at Lake Superior, ground truth in black, the system-wide prediction envelope in blue, and the superior prediction model in red, we can see that generally it does capture the ground truth, but not at these high anomaly levels, such as in July and November. So it's not quite as confident, and it doesn't exactly capture the ground truth. So we next looked at training on Lake Erie alone, and we saw that it overfits. And by overfitting, I mean, when we look at the training costs, it's like, oh yeah, I've trained this model. But when we look at validation, we can see that that's not the truth. We should be seeing a downward trend, and we are not seeing that. And so with the standard deviation, again, we're seeing relatively low values. But if we look at a time series, again, ground truth in black, system-wide model in blue, and Lake Erie model in red, we see that it did not capture the ground truth. It didn't do very well. It was pretty confidently incorrect. So we saw that one single training day was not enough information for Lake Erie, likely due to its size. It has the smallest amount of information when you look at one single training day. So some conclusions. We developed a novel Great Lakes use case for deep sensor, which is the first of its kind. We saw that prediction uncertainty highlights shallower, rapidly changing areas where measurements are needed. And we also explored these 3 different training regimes. Using every grid cell across many days gave us a complete characterization. Randomly sampling points across many training days was generally more information was needed rather more days, more sampling points, or more epochs. And we saw that using one training day was generally enough information to constrain the predictions, but that is, but there's more to be done. So if we look at some further research directions, we can definitely refine training, exploring different densities. Is there some amount of random points or number of training days that will converge and also capture the ground truth and give us the most information possible looking at uncertainty? We can add more data in addition to bathymetry and a lake mass, such as atmospheric variables like ENSO or water quality, and also existing Great Lakes observing system platforms. And we could also consider other less well sampled variables. So instead of trying to highlight uncertainty in sea surface temperature, look at something like water quality. And lastly, we can explore other deep sensor features and do something much more like the paper did. So one thing is that they have different metrics of uncertainty. So rather just looking at standard deviation, there's joint or marginal mutual information, which is how well one random variable informs the other. And some applications of this research. The Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law are both avenues of funding that GLOS, the Great Lakes Observing System, is expecting to receive, where they will expand sites or repair and replace existing platforms. So any research done with this project or anything built upon that can be used to inform platform placements. And that's all I have. Thank you all for listening.
Great job, Erin, and we'd be happy to take questions.
First off, fantastic presentation. So I noticed in the picture you included of all the existing buoys, there were already a lot accounting for the variability in Western Lake Michigan and Western Lake Erie, but not as many in Western Lake Huron, especially like near Saginaw Bay. So I was wondering if your study could conclude that maybe that area might need more observing stations.
Yeah, that's definitely a conclusion that you could draw from this. Yeah.
Thank you.
And also these platforms that I provided are only the ones that capture temperature, since temperature is the, so it's surface temperature is the focus variable.
Thank you.
Real quick, it's a similar question to the last talk. Did you analyze the errors and figure out if there's like any patterns in the errors, particularly with the first and third methods that you're looking at there, in terms of the deviation of what was observed versus what was fitted and stuff like that?
We did. We didn't do any significant analysis. Like I said, we really just looked at the shape of the validation RMSE curve, and we're looking to see a convergence of that curve.
I'll ask you a question, Erin.
Yeah.
Similar to a question for Roshni. So also being native of California, what drew you to come to work on Great Lakes research this summer?
Part of it was, like Rashi said, I don't know anything about the Midwest or the Great Lakes. I frankly did not know the names or how many Great Lakes there were until I stepped foot into this lab and quickly learned what all the lakes were due to all of the figures that are everywhere. But it was really interesting getting to know everything. And I definitely made an effort to have a background or to do some literature review and get background on the variability of the Great Lakes. And it's been a really great learning experience. And they are in fact great, as I found.
Thanks, Erin. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Did not.
Hi, great talk. I wanted to give you an opportunity to connect some of this work with, I know you're really interested in salmon. Do you see any possibilities? Are there ways that this kind of approach or kind of technology, could be used in a context that's like useful for kind of understanding population dynamics or salmon conservation efforts? That's a really big question. Sorry I kind of put you on the spot with it, but it's kind of just a daydreaming question, thinking big, blue skies kind of question.
I actually thought about, oh, what if somebody asked me about fisheries application of this? And I was like, nobody's going to ask me that. And so I didn't prepare an answer. But like Dani said, I do have a pretty big research interest of Pacific salmon, which are strangely abundant in the Great Lakes, to my surprise. Yeah, but if the variable that you are trying to predict is like abundance, then I believe that you could apply deep sensor to that, where instead of observing systems, you could, like buoys, you can look at sampling of like angler samplings and port samplings and things like that.